Geoff Mosher is the co-host of the Inside the Birds podcast, and he is right there on your video screen if you're watching on the X platform and on YouTube. If you're listening on the radio, it's Football at 4 Motion Friday night. You got another signing, but it didn't come back to Philadelphia. And I guess as the days went on, I wonder if people were like, maybe there's not a market for Mekhi Becton. Maybe he'll come back here. Well, it only takes one. And the L.A. Chargers, 2 years, $20 million. Too rich for the Eagles' blood to bring Becton back to Philadelphia.
Yeah, it was going to take. And again, the Eagles, as we've talked about, Mike, they were interested in bringing everybody back. It wasn't that they just let them walk. Can you hear me?
Yep. Yeah, no, he's telling me to turn you up. I said I can't turn you up much higher.
Oh, well, I'll yell if you want. No. The Eagles were interested in everybody. They would love to have brought them all back. But as we've discussed, their cash budget this year is tighter than in years past. And a lot of cash is due to players that they have on the roster now that are good players and in the form of option bonuses and other bonuses. So anything north of several million outside of Zach Bond was not going to be tenable for a lot of these guys. And I know that with Becton being out there for a couple of days, it may have appeared that the market wasn't great for him. I think 2 years, $20 million, and the fact that the guaranteed money isn't reported makes me believe. We'll wait and see the contract, but that $20 million might be not the official full number or the realistic number. We'll see. But still, that was going to be more than the Eagles were willing to offer. I think the Chargers make a tremendous amount of sense. I felt from the beginning, and we talked about it a lot on the podcast, that Mekhi Becton was not going to be everybody's cup of tea. He was still a right guard for 1 year only. He's a massive human being. He plays in a scheme in Philadelphia. He played in a scheme that was mostly inside running, inside zone, duo, things like that, where he can kind of double team and just use his massive body to create those lanes inside. And that's a lot of what Jim Harbaugh likes to do. The Chargers run the ball. They signed Najee Harris. They're going to be a smash-mouth offense. So they could probably see the potential in Mekhi Becton, maybe more so than a Shanahan-style team that's going to run to the outside a lot of stretch zone, a lot of wide zone, where you're moving your linemen horizontally instead of north-south, Mike. So I think that signing made a lot of sense for them. It'll be interesting because the Chargers have a very good offensive line, and they have some pretty good guards, obviously, with Trey Pipkins and Zion Johnson. So maybe they're going to make a move to accommodate Mekhi Becton there. We'll see.
All right, let's get into this a little interesting, a little deeper, because it is interesting here. So Becton leaves. First off, how did Becton, is this a huge loss for them? People look at Becton and said, this guy was really good. Could the Eagles have found a way, or was he just, I think by all accounts, he was the fifth guy on that line.
Yeah, I think it's fair. There were times that Mekhi struggled with things in pass protection, sorting, as far as when you put 5 or 6 men on the line of scrimmage, figuring out which guy to block. And these are small instances. He obviously had a very good year. But he's, like I said, his footwork, he's still learning to play guard. It doesn't come naturally to him. When Tyler Steen gets in there, Tyler Steen played tackle in college, but he's been playing and practicing at guard for 2 years now. Kenyon Green was the best guard coming out of college a couple of years ago out of A&M, and things just didn't work out well for him in Houston, and we'll see what else the Eagles do. But it'll be a drop-off in how massive of a human being that Mekhi Becton was compared to whoever replaces him, and that's a big part of it. When you're double teaming, and then when you're able to kick out there and get your massive body on a smaller player, that helps, especially a guy like Saquon, who doesn't need that much space, right? So there's a difference there. But I don't think he's irreplaceable by any stretch of the means. Yeah. Remember, they didn't even know he was going to be the starting right guard.
Well, and that's where I wanted to go, because last year Tyler Steen was the guy until he got beat out. Steen is in a similar situation now. He's probably the guy unless he gets beat out. So I would imagine this turns into, like last year, there are going to be some more storylines as the roster is currently built. Obviously, the draft adds to more. But at what they have right now, you have two guys battling for that right guard spot, and maybe even Keegan, the kid they drafted last year, if you want to throw him into the mix. But I would imagine Green and Steen, the double E's, and Keegan double E's, by the way, will be battling for right guard.
I think Keegan faces a much more uphill challenge. Yes, he'll probably be in the mix, so to speak. He's only really played. Do you remember Sua Opeta when the Eagles had him?
Absolutely.
Right. So he was only a left guard and really struggled for the first 2 years of being an Eagle to move. And then they finally coached him up to move. So maybe by year 2 here with Keegan, they'll figure out, if he can play right guard or not. But yeah, Green, Steen, the double E's, I like that. And whoever they still wind up attaining. Because remember, Mekhi Becton didn't even sign with the Eagles until after the draft. So you can't count out any move that the Eagles have yet to make at that position.
Yeah, and, obviously, last year it started, and then he got hurt, right? That's what happened. He got hurt, and that allowed Becton. Who knows if Becton would have even got a shot there had Steen not got hurt in training camp. That was a big story. I would imagine this time around, Green is a more natural guard, so he will get the reps at right guard almost immediately, as opposed to last year when they got Becton, they didn't even know they were going to use him at guard.
Right. Green will automatically come in. There's no other position. There's no tinkering here. I want to say it's less of a coaching up job for Stoutland because he's already a guard and doesn't have to transition. However, he's really coming from, 3 years of really not being a very good right guard. So there will have to be a lot of work Stoutland will put in with Green. But it's less about learning the position and more about rebuilding him.
What do we think of Steen? I mean, if he's the guy they end up going with, I thought for the most part when he went into games, you very rarely noticed that he was in games. It means he played pretty well. The only time you noticed him was, I think, in the Super Bowl. He got beat pretty good. Chris Jones is a handful for anybody, but for the most part, my look at this is for people who say, well, why did they bring Becton back? They let another guy walk. I don't know that he was $10 million or whatever, $8 million better than Tyler Steen.
Yeah, and that's what we'll have to find out. I mean, there were times where he played okay, he held the fort down well. There were times where, and not just the Super Bowl and other games, where he was exposed, so to say, as being a backup forced into starting action. So it almost doesn't really matter because when you're the starter and you're getting every single rep and every single snap, you're judged accordingly. So they drafted him. They felt he could play this position. They've groomed him for a year or 2 years, actually. This will be year 3, and he'll have his opportunity. He's got to stay healthy first and foremost. That's what cost him the job against Becton, really. As you mentioned, he suffered an ankle injury, I think it was, and then Becton slid in there and never really gave the job back. So that'll be priority number 1 for Tyler Steen. Be healthy and ready to compete this year when it comes time.
Geoff Mosher, Football at 4 here on the Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. Okay, so that's a spot where, maybe it's a little move, maybe a little bit of a drop-off. But, Jeff, you look around at 4 key spots. As of right now, unless Howie does something crazy or makes some sort of move, it's going to be hard-fetched to say they're going to be better in Milton Williams' spot, Josh Sweat's spot, Darius Slay's spot, or the safety spot where Chauncey Gardner-Johnson is. Is that fair?
That it's going to be
that they're going to have a better player. Because, look, everyone's like, well, free agency's not over. They can still do things. Okay, I'll play along. Absolutely. You can still get players at every position and do that. It's going to be far-fetched to say you're going to get a better player than what you had last year at any of those positions.
I mean, you could say that, but I don't think anybody – and I don't want to use Zach Baun as the be-all, end-all for every example, right? But that's a player that we didn't know was going to be actually better than the player than who he was replacing.
Mm-hmm. True. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah, right. Now, Sidney Brown's a different type of player than C.J. Gardner-Johnson. He's not a playmaker, picking off pads. He's not a coverage guy the way Gardner-Johnson is. So I'm really curious to see how they continue to address the safety position and what kind of safeties they bring in. So, yeah, but it's fair to say it'll be hard to replace what C.J. Gardner-Johnson brought to the team from a production standpoint at outside corner. Yeah, probably be hard to get a player as good as Darius Slay was, even at his age. But you just never know. We'll have to see who they draft or what moves they make, who they put in that spot. Until we know, it's hard to even make any long-term conclusions. Can Morrow Jones be as good as Milton Williams? Remember, Milton Williams for his first 3 years was was Moro Ojomo, right? I mean, we didn't talk about Milton Williams a whole lot until year 3 and then certainly year 4. So we'll see. We'll see what playing next to JalenCarter does for him.
No, you're definitely right about that. Ojomo's the one guy who hasn't really been given the opportunity, who maybe if he's been much like Milton Williams, you give him more snaps, maybe he can handle more. What do you think of the Adoree Jackson deal when you look at that cornerback spot over there? Is this, to me, all these signings, Geoff, kind of suggest we want you to compete for a job. We don't want to just hand you a job. So Kaylee Ringo, you might enter as the guy that we want to win it, but we're bringing in a guy to make sure that he pushes you. And that seems to be the story almost everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. And to add to that, when you do what you do by signing as many players as you can, especially to one-year deals, you're not beholden to them. You don't owe them so much money that you feel forced to play them, although Vic clearly showed last year that it doesn't matter how much you make. If you're not effective, he won't play you. But sometimes when you sign a lot of players to deals or trade for players, you have to see it through, right? But here you can go into the draft and basically draft any player you want. You don't feel forced to have to draft at a certain position because you lost so much at that position. That is what good teams do, and that allows you to be best player available.
I do also want to get your take on this as well. They essentially have remade their special teams as well. I mean, that's something, new snapper, new kick returner, punt returner there with Avery Williams potentially. But that they did not want CooperDeJean returning punts again, I can imagine. So that is something. And they when you bring in some of these secondary players, you better hope they play special teams too.
Yeah, and that's what makes Avery Williams an interesting signing. It's almost like the reverse. He plays special teams and plays it very well, but he doesn't play in the field. And Adam and I on today's podcast, Inside the Birds, it's up on the platforms. We didn't have an argument about it. We had a discussion about it, and I felt like it's going to be difficult for a guy like that to make the 53, because when you're on the 53 and you're primarily a special teamer, you still have to be able to get into a game and play if there are injuries at your position. This guy is a running back / defensive back, but he hasn't played. I think he played 10 snaps of running back last year, and before that he hadn't played corner in 2 or 3 years. So corner is not a great position of depth at the moment, outside corner especially. So I don't know. I mean, we'll see if they bring back Britton Covey. Anaya Smith will certainly get some opportunities to prove himself as a punt returner. But I always think it's difficult, unless you're a long snapper, where that's okay if that's all you do, which they did bring in a new one. It's hard to make the team when you don't have any contributions on the field whatsoever.
What do you make of the tight end situation, the fact that they signed 2? What does that read the tea leaves on those 2 signings?
Yeah, I mean, I think they needed to, regardless of whether or not they're trading Dallas Goedert, if he comes back or not, because Uzomah was on the team. He's a free agent. I don't know that they really wanted to bring him back, so you want to get younger at the position. And then they also lost, who am I thinking of? Uzomah, and there was another, Jack Stoll, right? He wound up signing with the Saints. So you really only have Calcaterra, Goddard, and E.J. Jenkins. So you got to add to that position, especially if you are going to move on from Dallas Goedert. But even if you're not, you'd probably like to increase your youth and talent level at that position anyway.
Yeah, they brought in 2 tight ends for the people out there last week. They did sign tight end Harrison Bryant, who I think is did he talk today? Did he speak earlier today, or is he going to speak? He
either has or he might be speaking now. I forget.
Yeah, I got a bunch of these text messages from Brett telling me who's talking when and doing what, but he's one of them. And then I guess at this point, if something happens with Dallas Goedert, they're open to trade talks. You guys have been reporting that. I don't know. Is it more likely with the 2 tight ends signed that Goddard is here, or does that now the messaging with that suggest that he is most likely not going to be here? Because I don't know. Do you see a situation where they just flat out cut him?
Dallas Goedert?
Yes.
I think that's the most unlikeliest of the scenarios, to be honest with you. They may have to take a really low draft pick because now teams know that the Eagles want to move on. But I mean, I would think that some team out there would like Dallas Goedert and would like to not have to necessarily get, into a competition with other teams for him. So, but I don't think any of the moves matter, to be honest with you, Mike, because either one of those guys can be cut. We're not talking about, they didn't go out and sign 2 tight ends who have some great history of, production in the NFL. They signed 2 backups who may be out of the NFL by this time next year. They were both guys who have had modest production where they have. They're the Eagles are hoping that environmentally these guys were not in the best positions to succeed, and in their system they'll be better. But they also signed them to the type of contracts where if they're just not good players, they won't be here.
Yeah. So just for the listeners and the people watching, the fact that they signed 2 tight ends isn't saying to you that means Dallas Goedert's just getting cut because they brought 2 tight ends in here.
Not at all. If they signed these guys to 3 or 4 year deals, then we'd be having a different discussion. But these are 1 year. I mean, look at all the 1 year deal signings that haven't made the team. Or what, Devin White last year, a couple of years ago, Terrell Edmonds barely made it to the. I guess he made it to the trade deadline. Got traded, or no, before that they traded for Kevin Byard. He was part of the deal. Greedy Williams got cut. I mean, I could give you about 5 to 10 guys who signed these kind of contracts and didn't make the team.
We always try to put the pieces of the puzzle together before the draft, which is sneaking up on us now. We are almost turning the calendar. We're halfway through March, but about a month and some change until the NFL draft. I wonder if Howie's kind of done until the draft, and waits to see what happens because he usually that second and third wave, he usually hits something and pulls those 1 year guys in. Has he already done that?
No, I mean, I still think that there's places where this team can add. I think after the draft will be a prime time to add because then you'll know more what your depth chart looks like going into OTAs and camp because you brought 6 or 7 players in through the draft and through priority free agency or rookie free agency, we call it. And then, there's always a couple of guys where you think, all right, there's the trade market too. You may not get somebody in the draft that you were hoping to get, but you've been talking with a team.
Yeah.
That's how the C.J. Gardner-Johnson trade came about 3 years ago with New Orleans. There have been other moves that have been made right before the start of the season. So there's a lot of time left. I know fans hate to hear that. And I know that as soon as the players start getting signed, you get excited about them and what they could be as an Eagle. We get a lot of backlash sometimes because we point out this guy might not make the team. What do you mean? He signed on the second day of free agency. Yeah, I can give you like 8 guys who signed on the second day of free agency. I can give you guys who signed for more money than these guys. Devin White, for example, that didn't make the team. It happens.
Well, and on the flip side of that too, they signed big-name veteran players late in the free agent game that didn't make it. So just because you sign a Devin White-level linebacker, that doesn't mean he's making the team. So, a lot of these signings here or there are for reasons. One could be, hey, we want to bring a veteran player in. I think that's the big thing is what the Eagles try to do. Bring in a guy who's going to push the guy that we really want to win the job so that we don't just hand that guy the job. He earns it.
100%. 100%. And I guarantee you the thought process in the building is on guys like Josh Uche, on guys like Adoree Jackson, on guys like maybe one of those tight ends that they feel that their culture and their system will do for one of those guys like it did for Mekhi Becton. Again, I'm not going to go Zach Bond because I don't think they expect any of these guys to be all pros. But, Chris Long, when he came a couple of years ago, rediscovered himself after being in no man's land with the Patriots and some other team for a year. I'm sure the people in the building think that there's got to be 1 or 2 among this batch that's going to wind up surprising them.
Yeah, I love this time of the year. We're so far off, but, you love getting into the battles and kind of, Earnshaw and I got into an argument on Friday about, I don't know if you heard this podcast, Daryl Morey was at the summit, and he's talking about how they use AI for their stuff. And I'm saying, I get it. It's a tool. And I'm saying if the tool is available to you, sure. I'm not saying you shouldn't use it. But sports is supposed to be about competitiveness, me against you, not the AI tool telling me stuff that I'm now spinning against you. That's why I think it just kind of cheapens sports a little bit when you've now got these computers involved. So I'll ask you a question that has nothing to do with AI, artificial intelligence. But right now, Geoff Mosher, who gets more snaps on defense, Adoree Jackson or Kaylee Ringo?
When the season begins?
Yeah, this season. Which of those two?
Look into the crystal ball and be like, who played more?
Which guy ended up having a bigger impact to the defense, playing more snaps, Kaylee Ringo or Adoree Jackson? Because much like Steen and Green, you would imagine that those two guys. Now, we could be adding a third name in the mix after draft day, but right now, if training camp was to start today and their two are battling now, and I'm saying, Mosher, who's going to win that that outside corner spot? Is it Jackson or Ringo?
All right, Michael Gill, I will play your game in the spirit of what the heck else do we do in the offseason, right? I will say Kaylee Ringo. There's more invested in him, clearly. And, even though he's been described to me as not ideal to be your starter, I don't think anybody would say it's ideal for Adoree Jackson at this stage to be your starter either. Although I have to admit, Mike, when they signed Adoree Jackson, my first thought was, why are they signing another 34-year-old corner when they just let one go out the door? And then I looked, I'm like, holy cow, he's only 29. I mean, he will be 30 when the season starts, and that is on the longer tooth side for a corner, but I actually thought he was a lot older. Feels like he's been around for a while.
You're right about that. When he signed and he was still like in his late 20s, I was like, Adoree Jackson feels like he's been around forever. 28 years old, Adoree Jackson. All right, Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast. The latest pod is out. You can check it out on all podcasting platforms, and we'll see if the Eagles end up doing something between now and the draft, which I would imagine they do. They do have 4 fifth-round picks. They could be very active on draft night as well, and they got a ton of picks coming as well. And now that they lost Becton, there's going to be another comp pick, I would imagine, coming their way. So they're just more and more draft picks, which probably means more and more activity in the trade game. Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast. All right, buddy, thanks.
Yeah, you only get 4, by the way. Maximum of 4 comp picks.
So they lost Becton, Williams, Sweat, and that's 3 right there, right?
Well, I mean, they lost Slay.
Gainwell.
You're right. That's a release. That doesn't count. Becton,
Gainwell.
Sweat.
But they're not going to lose.
Gainwell. Yeah. You're right. So. Okay. See you guys.
See you.
Have a good one.
All right. There's Geoff Mosher, everybody, from the Inside the Birds podcast and InsideTheBirds.com.